The shelling had been going on for an hour. On a hill near Haren, a suburb just east of the ancient city of Aachen, the men of Company K, 18th Infantry Regiment, crouched in their fighting positions and waited to die. High explosive rounds tore into foxholes, caved in overhead cover, and sent white-hot shrapnel screaming across the hillside. Dirt, concrete, and body parts rained down in equal measure. When the barrage finally lifted, the silence lasted only a moment. Then came the infantry. An entire German battalion, hundreds of men, supported by tanks, surged out of the tree lines and swept toward the American positions. The 3rd platoon went first. Overrun. Gone. The line that the Big Red One had bled for weeks to hold was now broken wide open, and through that gap, German soldiers were flooding in like water through a cracked dam. In the middle of the chaos, a 22-year-old sergeant from a small mountain town in North Carolina stopped carrying wounded men to safety. He looked toward the breach. He saw the enemy pouring through, and he made a decision that would change the course of the battle. He would stop the breakthrough, alone, with whatever he could find. His name was Max Thompson, and before the sun set that day, he would have used every weapon on the hill. To understand what Max Thompson did on that hilltop, you first have to understand what Aachen meant to both sides. By the fall of 1944, the Allied armies had swept across France and Belgium at a pace that stunned even their own commanders. D-Day was barely 4 months behind them. Paris had fallen. Brussels was free. And now, for the first time since Napoleon's armies had marched in the other direction, a Western army stood at the gates of Germany itself. Aachen was the first major city in their path. For the Americans, it was an obstacle, a fortified position that had to be taken before they could advance to the Rhine and the industrial Ruhr Valley beyond. But for Adolf Hitler, Aachen was sacred ground. This was the city of Charlemagne, the seat of the Holy Roman Empire, the place where German kings had been crowned for 600 years. Hitler ordered it held at all costs. To surrender Aachen would be to admit that the fatherland was falling. The city sat nestled between 2 lines of the Siegfried Line, the massive defensive network stretching along Germany's entire western border. Hundreds of reinforced concrete pillboxes dotted the surrounding hills. Fields of dragon's teeth tank obstacles blocked every road. Minefields, trenches, and interlocking fields of machine gun fire covered every approach. The Americans would have to claw through all of it. The job fell to 2 veteran divisions. From the north, Major General Leland Hobbs's 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory, would push south through the factory town of Würselen. From the south and east, Major General Clarence Hubner's 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, would drive through Haren and circle the city, sealing off escape and reinforcement. The Big Red One needed no introduction. These men had stormed the beaches of North Africa, fought through the hills of Sicily, and clawed their way ashore at Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. They had punched through the hedgerows of Normandy and raced across France. Now they were being asked to do something no American division had done in this war: take a German city on German soil. Among those men was Sergeant Max Thompson. Thompson was born on July 21, 1922, in the small community of Bethel, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Haywood County, North Carolina. He was the kind of young man nobody would have pointed to and said, "There goes a future war hero." A local newspaper would later describe him simply as a quiet, unassuming young man who was fond of mathematics. He got good grades in school. He played basketball. He graduated in 1940 and went to work at the Champion Paper and Fiber Company in nearby Canton, one of the biggest employers in western North Carolina. When the war came, Thompson enlisted on November 18, 1942. The Army put him in the infantry, and he was assigned to Company K, 3rd Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment, the Big Red One. By October 1944, he had survived everything the European theater could throw at a man. He was a squad leader now, a sergeant in a division that had been fighting continuously for nearly 2 years. The men around him were hardened combat veterans, but nothing they had experienced would prepare any of them for what was about to happen on that hill near Haren. The assault on Aachen began on October 2, 1944. The opening bombardment was staggering. 372 guns firing more than 18,000 rounds in the first hours, followed by waves of fighter bombers. The 30th Division pushed south through fortified villages where every cellar had been turned into a fighting position. The 1st Division struck from the east, grinding forward through pillbox after pillbox, each one requiring a separate assault. The fighting was merciless. In the Stolberg corridor south of the city, the 3rd Armored Division saw its tank force cut from 300 Shermans to just 70 by German 88mm anti-tank fire. Replacements arrived at the front and were dead within hours. The German defenders, many of them Volksgrenadiers, poorly trained but fighting on their own soil for the first time, resisted with a fury that surprised even the most seasoned American commanders. On October 8th, Captain Bobby Brown led Company C of the 18th Infantry in a frontal assault on Crucifix Hill, a key height dominating the eastern approaches to Aachen. Brown was wounded 3 times during the attack. His company took 25% casualties, 9 killed, 41 wounded. But they took the hill. Brown would receive the Medal of Honor. 2 days later, the 18th Infantry reached Heron, cutting the main roads into Aachen. An ultimatum was delivered to the German garrison commander, Colonel Gerhard Wilk of the 246th Volksgrenadier Division: surrender or face the consequences. Wilk refused. Hitler demanded resistance to the last man. On October 12th, the street fighting inside the city began in earnest. Lieutenant Colonel Darrell Daniels' 2nd Battalion, 26th Infantry, began the grim work of clearing Aachen block by block, building by building, room by room. His men advanced with tanks and tank destroyers firing directly into buildings at point-blank range, driving the defenders into cellars, then finishing them with grenades. 80% of the city would be destroyed by the time it was over. Meanwhile, on the perimeter, the Germans were throwing everything they had at the American lines, trying to break the encirclement. Fresh units were committed. Counterattacks came daily. The men holding the outer ring, men like those in Company K, 18th Infantry, found themselves absorbing blow after blow. Which brings us back to that hill near Heron. October 18, 1944. Company K was dug in, holding a critical position along the arc the Big Red One had drawn around Aachen. If the Germans could break through here, the encirclement would fail. The entire battle could unravel. The Germans came at dawn. First, the artillery, a sustained bombardment lasting a full hour that inflicted heavy casualties on Company K. Men were killed in their foxholes. The wounded screamed for medics who were themselves wounded or dead. Fighting positions that had taken days to prepare were blown apart in minutes. When the barrage lifted, the German infantry was already moving. A full battalion, hundreds of soldiers with tanks grinding forward behind them, hit the American positions at their weakest point. The 3rd platoon was overrun almost immediately. The sheer weight of the German assault crushed the platoon's defenses. Suddenly, there was a gaping hole in the American line, and German soldiers were pouring through it. Sergeant Thompson had been doing what experienced NCOs do during a barrage, moving from position to position, dragging wounded men to cover, keeping his people alive. But when he saw the enemy flooding through the 3rd platoon's shattered positions, he understood instantly what was at stake. If no one plugged that gap, the entire company would be destroyed, and the 1st Division's hold on this sector would collapse. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't call for reinforcements. He ran to an abandoned machine gun, its crew already dead or gone, threw himself behind it, and opened fire directly into the advancing Germans. The effect was immediate and devastating. German soldiers who had been advancing with confidence walked straight into a concentrated stream of fire. They fell in heaps. The advance staggered. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Carter, Thompson's battalion commander, would later describe the scene in a letter that carried a detail no one who heard it could ever forget. He told Thompson that in front of his machine gun position, there were so many fallen enemy soldiers that the men in his squad said they could have walked all the way to the German tank without their feet ever touching the ground. But the Germans had armor, and one of those tanks found Thompson's position. A direct hit from a tank round destroyed the machine gun. The blast threw Thompson backward, dazed, ears ringing, barely conscious. His captain, William Russell, later described him staggering to his feet, shaken but somehow uninjured, and stumbling toward an abandoned Browning automatic rifle lying on the ground nearby. Thompson picked it up, turned toward the breach, and, completely alone against an entire enemy force that was still pouring through the gap, fired burst after burst into the oncoming Germans. The leading elements of the attack faltered. Men who had been charging forward dove for cover. The momentum of the breakthrough was dying. Killed by a single man with a bar who simply would not stop shooting. Then the bar jammed. Thompson threw it aside. He grabbed a rocket launcher, found a German light tank moving toward the American positions, and put a round straight into it. The tank erupted in flames, burning in the middle of the battlefield like a warning signal to every German soldier who could see it. Technical Sergeant Weldon Clinton watched all of this unfold. When asked later to describe what Thompson had done, he could only manage 5 words that said everything. He used every weapon on the hill. And he had. Thompson picked up rifles from the fallen. American and German alike, it no longer mattered. He threw grenades. He charged directly at German riflemen, scattering them with hand grenades at close range. He moved from position to position across that hilltop, firing, reloading, discarding jammed or empty weapons, picking up the next one. One man cycling through every piece of killing iron on that battlefield, refusing to let the line break. Slowly, impossibly, the German advance ground to a halt. By late afternoon, the rest of Company K had regrouped enough to counterattack. The Germans were pushed back from most of the ground they had taken, but 3 concrete pillboxes remained in enemy hands, and those pillboxes commanded the terrain. They had to be eliminated. Thompson's squad drew the assignment. Night had fallen by the time they moved forward, but German fire from the pillboxes was too intense. The squad couldn't advance. Staff Sergeant Herbert Spivey described the situation bluntly. The enemy was ready for the counterattack, and the squad was stopped cold. That's when Thompson went forward alone. Again, he crawled 20 yards across open ground. No cover, no concealment, nothing between him and the enemy but darkness and nerve, until he was close enough to fire rifle grenades directly through the narrow apertures of the pillbox. Every German inside that pillbox immediately turned their weapons on him. Bullets tore the ground around his body. He was hit. He was wounded. And still, he kept loading grenades and firing them through that slit in the concrete, one after another, until the Germans inside could take no more. They abandoned the position. The hill held. The line held. The encirclement of Aachen held. 3 days later, on October 21, 1944, Colonel Gerhard Wilk emerged from his concrete bunker under a white flag. The German garrison, out of ammunition, out of food, out of hope, surrendered. Aachen became the first German city to fall to the Allies in the entire war. Over 3,400 German soldiers were taken prisoner. The Americans had suffered roughly 5,000 casualties in the battle. The city itself was 80% destroyed. 7 medals of honor were awarded to American soldiers for their actions during the fighting in and around Aachen, the highest concentration of the nation's highest military decoration for a single engagement in the European theater. Staff Sergeant Joseph Schaefer, who held a crossroads near Stolberg against 2 German companies with only his M1 rifle. Captain Bobby Brown, wounded 3 times on Crucifix Hill. Staff Sergeant Jack Pendleton, who gave his life crawling toward a German machine gun nest at Badenburg so his men could flank the position. Staff Sergeant Freeman Horner, who charged 3 machine gun nests at Würselen with a Thompson submachine gun and hand grenades. Captain James Burt, who climbed out of his tank and walked through enemy fire to position his armor at Würselen. Every one of them a story that deserved to be told. Every one of them part of the terrible price that was paid for the first German city to fall. But Max Thompson's story carries a particular weight. It wasn't just courage, though it was that in overwhelming measure. It was a kind of mechanical, relentless refusal to stop. When one weapon was destroyed, he picked up another. When that one jammed, he found a third. When there were no more guns within reach, he used grenades. When the mission demanded that he crawl alone into enemy fire, he crawled. The man who had been fond of mathematics in high school solved the deadliest equation of his life with the only tools available. and he kept solving it until the answer was 0. Lieutenant Colonel Carter put it in the simplest terms possible in his letter to Thompson after the battle. "So many times," he wrote, "the tide of our battles were determined by the actions of one soldier. In this case, you were the one soldier." On May 24, 1945, just weeks after the war in Europe ended, Lieutenant General Clarence Hubner, the man who had commanded the Big Red One through Aachen and beyond, personally placed the Medal of Honor around Max Thompson's neck in a ceremony near Cheb, Czechoslovakia. Thompson also received the Purple Heart for his wounds that day, the Bronze Star for valor, and, in a rare distinction, the Soviet Union's Order of Glory, third class, recognizing his service to the Allied cause. After the war, Max Thompson went home to western North Carolina. He took a job at Champion International Paper in Canton, the same company where he had worked before the war, and spent his career in their inspection department. He married, he raised a family, he lived quietly in the mountains he had always known. He did not seek the spotlight. He turned down invitations to the kind of prestigious events that Medal of Honor recipients are routinely offered. In 1960, a reporter from the Danville Register and Bee managed to track him down and wrote an article whose headline captured the man perfectly. Medal of Honor winner prefers to forget his days of combat. Years later, his grandson Austin told a reporter from the Mountaineer newspaper something that said it all. He was very humble, Austin said, and rarely ever talked about his days of war combat, I guess trying his best to forget. Max Thompson died on November 30th, 1996, at the age of 74, in the same North Carolina mountains where he had been born. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Unca. The quiet man from Bethel who liked mathematics and played basketball had done something on a hilltop near Aachen that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. And then he spent the rest of his life trying to do exactly that. There is something deeply American about this. The men who did the most often said the least. They didn't write memoirs or give speeches or put their medals in glass cases for visitors to admire. They went home, they went to work, they raised their children, and they carried what they had done in a silence so deep that even their own families could only guess at what lay beneath it. Max Thompson used every weapon on the hill, and then he put them all down and never picked them up again. That is the measure of a soldier. If this story moved you, take a second to subscribe, hit that like button, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. And share this one with a veteran, with a family member, with someone who needs to hear what one man can do when the line is about to break. We'll see you in the next one.